Alien girl accepted the human's hand only once. Yet that moment became the one she held closest. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The winds howled across the barren landscape, a desolate stretch of frozen earth that seemed endless, stretching toward the horizon with nothing but icy wasteland in every direction. Among the distant, jagged peaks of what once was a thriving, now dead world, a solitary figure trudged through the snow. Alara, her name spoken only in whispers by those who knew her story, walked with a determination that masked the pain she'd been carrying for what seemed like an eternity. Her bright green skin shimmered in the weak light of the twin suns, her long, flowing silver hair streaked with frost. Her eyes, glowing with an ethereal light, were fixed on the ground ahead, but the cold seemed to seep through her skin, chilling her to the core. She had long since lost track of time, of days or nights. Only the constant ache of her body and the emptiness in her heart remained. For years, she had lived in isolation, betrayed by her own people, and driven into the wilderness to survive. But today was different. Today, she was no longer alone. Adam, a human with pale skin, blonde hair, and a rugged, strong physique, appeared as if from nowhere. He was a soldier, someone who had long learned to trust his instincts and his training. When his transport crashed on this desolate world, he was thrown into a fight for survival. Unlike Alara, he had no deep connection to the planet, no memories tied to its cold, barren land. His only focus was survival. When he first laid eyes on Alara, he saw a figure barely standing, her frail body wrapped in tattered remnants of what might have been regal clothing. Her beauty was undeniable, even in her broken state. But it was her gaze that struck him, the sorrow, the defeat, the years of suffering hidden. Behind her eyes, without thinking, Adam approached, extending his hand to her in a gesture of help, of kindness, something she hadn't experienced in what felt like forever. The cold, indifferent stare from Alara's eyes softened only for a brief moment before she took his hand, but only for a heartbeat. The world around them seemed to stand still as their hands met. The warmth of Adam's touch a sharp contrast to the chill of the planet and the isolation she had come to accept as her fate. For Alara, that single moment, brief as it was the most human interaction she had experienced in years. A human, someone she had been taught to mistrust, to see as weak, was offering her a lifeline, something she hadn't even dared to hope for. As their hands touched, the cold air seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a strange warmth that spread through her chest. This fleeting act of kindness, so simple and yet so foreign to her, became the one thing she held closest in her heart. It was the beginning of something she never thought she would find again, hope. But Alara was not ready to surrender her heart just yet. She had seen too much pain, too many betrayals. And though Adam's touch lingered in her memory, she kept her distance, unsure whether she could trust it, unsure whether she could trust him. The moments passed, and Adam, sensing the uncertainty, gave her space, not pushing her further. But as they walked side by side through the endless snow, a new understanding began to form between them. Alara didn't know what the future held, but that single moment, the feel of Adam's hand in hers, had already changed everything. The days that followed felt like an eternity for Alara. The ice and snow, the endless white of the barren world, seemed to press in on her, yet something was different now. For the first time in years, she felt as though there was a possibility of warmth, of connection. Adam, the human who had extended his hand to her, became a constant presence at her side. Each day, they journeyed through the harsh terrain, looking for shelter, food, and supplies, but something more intangible was growing between them. Adam's actions were simple, yet powerful. He never asked for anything in return. He cared for her in ways that were foreign to her. He helped her with small tasks, patched up her wounds when they got too deep, and shared what little they had. He didn't speak much of his past, and neither did she. They both had their secrets, their pain, but in their silence, they understood each other. As they sat by the fire one evening, the wind howling outside, Alara found herself staring at the flames, lost in thought. She felt the heat from the fire warming her face, but it was the warmth from Adam's steady presence that filled her chest. She looked over at him, noticing the way the firelight danced across his features, highlighting the strength in his jawline, the determined glint in his eyes. He was a stranger to her, yet, in many ways, he felt more like home than anyone she had ever known. Adam looked up from the fire, his gaze meeting hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled, a simple, genuine smile that seemed to soften his rugged features. "We'll get through this," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. Alara nodded, though doubt still lingered in her heart. How could she trust him? How could she allow herself to rely on someone when all her life she had been taught to stand alone? But when Adam's hand reached out, offering her a piece of dried meat from their meager supply, she didn't hesitate. She took it from him, their fingers brushing in the process. A small, electric jolt ran through her. It was a strange sensation, one she hadn't felt in years, an odd mix of warmth and fear, of longing and caution. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Adam nodded, his expression unreadable. They sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the fire filling the space between them. It was then that Alara realized something. She had stopped thinking of him as just a human, just an outsider. Adam had become something more. He had become a lifeline. Despite her reservations, despite her instincts to stay guarded, she couldn't deny the truth in her heart. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe that he wasn't like the others, those who had abandoned her, used her, betrayed her. She wanted to believe that the kindness he showed her was real. And for the first time in a long time, Alara allowed herself to hope. Hope for something more than just survival. Hope for a future where she wasn't alone. As the fire burned down to embers, and the night stretched on, Alara's thoughts turned inward, but her heart remained open. Open to the possibility of something she had long since given up on. Trust. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but she knew this much: it would be different. With Adam by her side, there was a chance for redemption, a chance for healing. And for the first time in years, Alara felt like maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth fighting for. As the days passed, Adam and Alara's bond deepened in ways neither of them had expected. The harsh landscape around them remained unforgiving, but there was a subtle warmth that had begun to grow between them, something that had nothing to do with the freezing temperatures or the constant struggle for survival. Adam had proven himself, time and time again, to be someone who could be relied upon. His unwavering care for her had started to chip away at the walls Alara had built around herself. In return, Alara found herself slowly, cautiously, opening up. There were moments, fleeting as they were, where she would find herself watching Adam as he worked, his expression focused and serious, and she would feel a strange stirring deep within her. It was an unfamiliar feeling, one she had long ago pushed aside. Her past experiences had taught her to be wary of such emotions, to keep her heart protected. But with Adam, it was different. He was kind in ways she hadn't known were possible, and his presence was something she found herself craving more than she ever thought she would. One evening, as they huddled together by the fire, the wind howling outside their shelter, Adam spoke quietly. "Alara, I need you to know something. Whatever happens, I'm not leaving you behind. We're in this together, all the way." His words, though simple, struck her deeply. They weren't just words of survival. They were words of trust, of commitment. Alara looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard such promises before, but never had they felt so real. She had been betrayed, abandoned, used. She had learned to survive on her own, to expect nothing from anyone. But Adam's eyes, steady and sincere, told her something different. Maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for trust. She wanted to believe him, more than anything. But a part of her, a part that had been buried for so long, still hesitated. What if he left? What if this was just another lie, another disappointment? "I believe you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the first time she had said the words aloud, and they felt both freeing and terrifying. Adam smiled softly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good," he said simply, his voice full of warmth. "Because I'm not going anywhere. And I won't let you go either." In that moment, Alara felt something shift inside her. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was enough to make her realize that, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something she had thought she had lost forever: hope. The days continued to pass, and their journey grew even more treacherous. But Alara no longer felt the weight of the world pressing down on her alone. Adam was there, beside her, every step of the way. And as they continued their fight for survival, Alara found herself thinking less about the past and more about the future she never thought she would have. She didn't know what would happen next, or what their fate would be, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. Because with Adam by her side, she finally felt like she had something worth fighting for. The days continued to blend into one another as Adam and Alara traversed the frozen landscape, their journey now defined by a quiet, unspoken understanding between them. Alara found herself relying on Adam more than she ever thought she would. His presence had become a constant in her life, a steady anchor in the chaos of their survival. They shared small moments of peace, quiet conversations by the fire, the shared task of gathering what little food and supplies the barren world had to offer. But something more profound was starting to take root in Alara's heart. She no longer saw Adam as just a human. He was her companion, someone who had stepped into her life and become irreplaceable. The cold, harsh environment still surrounded them, but in those fleeting moments, she felt warmth, not from the fire, but from the connection they had built. One evening, as they sat beside the warmth of their fire, Alara felt a strange flutter in her chest. Adam, as usual, was tending to their small camp, adjusting their shelter and making sure their supplies were organized. His quiet confidence, his calm nature, had become a source of comfort for her. He looked over at her, catching her gaze. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice gentle yet firm. Alara met his eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to answer truthfully. "Better," she said quietly, her voice carrying a hint of vulnerability. "I didn't think I could trust anyone again." Adam's expression softened, and he sat down beside her, close but not too close, respecting the distance she still kept between them. "Trust takes time," he said, his voice calm and steady. "But it's worth it." Alara didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked into the fire, letting the crackling warmth fill the space between them. She had never been one to share her emotions, but with Adam, it felt different. It felt safe. "I've been alone for so long," she said softly, almost to herself. "I didn't know what it would be like to rely on someone else, to trust them." Adam nodded, understanding more than she realized. "You don't have to do it all alone anymore," he said quietly. Alara's heart stirred at his words, but she pushed the feeling aside. She wasn't sure if she was ready to fully open up, but for the first time, she could see the possibility of a future where she wasn't alone. And that scared her. The next few days brought their own set of challenges. The weather grew colder, the wind sharper, and their resources began to dwindle. Yet, through it all, Adam remained calm, his focus unwavering. He had always been the protector, the one who kept them both alive. And Alara couldn't help but admire him for it. One evening, as they set up camp for the night, Alara found herself watching him more closely than usual. The way his hands worked with the tools, the quiet determination in his eyes, it was all so different from what she had known before. In her world, survival was a solitary endeavor, one built on mistrust and fear. But with Adam, she began to see that there was more to life than just surviving. There was living. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to consider what that might mean. As the night grew colder and the stars began to shine brightly above them, Alara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She was still afraid, still guarded, but there was something about Adam's presence that made the fear seem less insurmountable. She wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be afraid of what that meant. As the weeks passed, Adam and Alara grew more accustomed to the rhythm of their survival. The days were long, the nights even longer, but they had formed a routine. They had learned to adapt to the challenges of the harsh world around them. But more than that, they had learned to rely on each other in ways neither had anticipated. Adam was still the protector, the provider, the one who kept them both alive, but Alara had begun to find her own strength. She had learned to set up camp, to find food, and to endure the cold, but what she had gained most of all was a sense of belonging. Something had changed in her, something she hadn't been willing to admit until now. She had stopped thinking of survival as something she had to do alone. Every night, as they sat by the fire, Adam would share stories of his life, of Earth, of the places he had seen. At first, Alara had been skeptical, unwilling to engage in these tales of a far-off world she could never visit. But over time, she found herself listening more intently. His stories were a glimpse into a world so different from her own, yet, at the same time, so strangely familiar. As she listened to him, she realized that there was more to Adam than just his role as a protector. He was a man of depth, of compassion, of experiences that had shaped him into who he was. She admired that in him. One evening, after a long day of traveling through the snow and ice, Alara found herself looking at him in a way she hadn't before. She had always been guarded, keeping her emotions hidden, but tonight, there was something in the air, a shift, a quiet tension that made her realize how much she had come to care for him. They were sitting close to the fire, the heat from the flames casting a soft glow on their faces. Adam looked at her, his eyes steady, full of understanding. "You're thinking about something," he said, his voice gentle. Alara hesitated, unsure of how to express what was in her heart. For so long, she had been alone, afraid to trust anyone. But with Adam, things were different. "I never thought I would let anyone in again," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not after everything that's happened." Adam's expression softened, and for a moment, he was silent. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he said quietly. "You're not alone, Alara. Not as long as I'm here." His words struck her deeply, more than she had expected. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe them. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling of comfort, of safety. She looked at Adam, and for the first time, she didn't see him as just a human, just a stranger. She saw him as someone who had become integral to her survival, to her happiness. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Adam smiled, the kind of smile that made her heart flutter. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "We're in this together." As the fire crackled between them, Alara realized something important. She had stopped fearing the future. With Adam by her side, she could face whatever came next. The cold, the isolation, the struggles, they were all a little less daunting now, because she wasn't alone anymore. And that made all the difference. The days grew colder as the storm season arrived, and the two of them were forced to find shelter in a series of caves high up in the mountains. The wind howled, cutting through the cracks in their temporary shelter, but inside, the warmth from their small fire and each other's presence kept the cold at bay. They had become a team, a unit, something more than just two survivors. It was in these quiet moments, as they sat side by side, that Alara began to notice things about Adam she hadn't before. She saw the way his hands worked with precision, the quiet strength in his every movement, and the kindness in his eyes. Adam had always been a protector, but now, she realized, he was so much more. She had seen him fight to keep them alive, seen him take on the harsh environment without hesitation, but she also saw the side of him that was gentle and patient, the one who never pushed her, never forced her to open up, but always offered his help when needed. That side of him made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: comfort. One evening, after a particularly brutal storm passed, they ventured outside to assess the damage. The snow had piled up, covering the landscape in a thick blanket of white. They were stranded, cut off from any potential help, but Alara didn't feel the same fear she once would have. Adam was with her, and together, they could face anything. As they trudged through the snow, Alara glanced over at him, noticing the way the light from the low sun reflected off the snow, casting a soft glow on his face. She caught herself staring, quickly looking away, embarrassed by the thought. Adam looked over at her, his brow furrowed in concern. "You okay?" he asked, his voice warm, the sound of it somehow comforting in the cold air. Alara nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm fine," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure that she was. The truth was, she was beginning to feel something new, something that both scared and exhilarated her. She wasn't used to letting people in, not after everything she had been through, but with Adam, she was starting to understand what it meant to trust again. As they continued their trek, the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. Adam was there beside her, not pushing, not demanding, just walking with her through the storm, both literally and metaphorically. They had been through so much together, and yet, it felt like they were just beginning to understand one another. The weight of her past, the betrayals, the pain, the loneliness, still lingered in Alara's heart, but she was learning to let it go, piece by piece, with each moment they shared. That night, as they huddled around their fire, Alara found herself looking at Adam differently. He wasn't just the man who saved her from the cold, the man who had kept her alive against all odds. He was someone she could see a future with, someone who had shown her that there was more to life than survival. It was a strange thought, but one that filled her with a sense of possibility. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if they would survive this harsh world, or if they would ever see another safe place. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what came next. As the fire crackled between them, and the warmth from their shared space enveloped them, Alara made a choice. She chose to let go of the fear. She chose to trust Adam, to let herself believe in something more than just the fight to survive. And as she looked at him, her heart filled with something she hadn't felt in so long: hope. The days seemed to blur together as Adam and Alara continued their journey through the unrelenting landscape. The snowstorms had become more frequent, and the cold more biting. They had grown used to the harsh conditions, but the toll it took on their spirits was undeniable. Yet, amidst the struggle, there was an unspoken understanding between them, a quiet bond that had formed over weeks of survival. Adam had always been the steady rock, the one who made sure they both stayed alive, while Alara had slowly come to rely on him in ways she had never imagined. One evening, as the wind howled outside their shelter, Adam noticed Alara sitting by the fire, her face lost in thought. It was rare for her to show vulnerability, but tonight, something was different. He sat down beside her, his presence a comfort she hadn't realized she needed. "Alara," Adam said softly, his voice low and steady. "You've been quiet lately. What's on your mind?" She looked at him, the flickering light of the fire reflecting in her eyes. There was a moment of silence before she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought I'd come to care for someone again," she said, her words hanging in the air. "Not after everything that happened. But with you, it feels different." Adam's heart clenched at her words. He had known from the start that their connection was more than just survival. There was something deeper, something unspoken that had brought them together. But hearing Alara voice it aloud made him realize how much he had come to care for her as well. "I feel the same way," Adam said quietly. "I never imagined I'd find someone like you in a place like this." Alara turned her gaze back to the fire, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her jacket. The warmth of the fire was nothing compared to the warmth she felt when she was with him. The feelings that had begun to stir within her were confusing, but at the same time, they felt like a natural progression of everything they had been through together. She had fought against it, telling herself that she didn't have time for emotions. Survival had always been the priority, but now, it was clear that her heart had other plans. "I'm afraid," Alara admitted, her voice barely audible. "Afraid of what happens next, afraid of trusting again." Adam reached out, his hand gently touching hers. The simple gesture was enough to calm her, to remind her that she wasn't alone anymore. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We're in this together, Alara. Whatever comes next, we'll face it side by side." The weight of his words settled over her like a comforting blanket. For the first time in a long time, Alara allowed herself to believe it. They were a team. They were no longer just survivors. They were something more. They were two souls bound by the shared experience of surviving, of trusting, and of finding something beautiful amidst the chaos of their world. As the night wore on, the storm outside raged on, but inside their small shelter, there was warmth. Warmth not just from the fire, but from the connection they had built, from the bond that was slowly but surely becoming something neither of them could deny. Alara knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she also knew that with Adam by her side, she was no longer alone. And that, more than anything, was worth fighting for. The days seemed to stretch into an endless cycle of survival, but something had shifted within Alara. She had started to feel the weight of her past less, as the days with Adam slowly filled the empty spaces in her heart. They continued their journey through the frozen world, but it no longer felt like just survival. There was something deeper now, something between them that neither could ignore, even if they didn't speak of it aloud. One morning, after a restless night of snow and wind, Alara stood outside their makeshift shelter, staring out at the endless white. The storm had passed, leaving the world quieter, as if it was holding its breath. Adam came up behind her, his footsteps soft in the snow. "We should move today," he said, his voice calm, as it always was. Alara nodded without turning around. She could feel his presence behind her, comforting and familiar. "Where to?" she asked, her voice low. "We'll head toward the cliffs," Adam replied. "There's a pass we can use to get through the mountains." Alara paused for a moment, then turned to face him. She could see the determination in his eyes, the same look he had when he was focused on keeping them both alive. But today, there was something else in his gaze, something softer, warmer. "We'll make it," she said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Adam smiled, a small, knowing smile that tugged at Alara's heart. "I know we will," he said. And for the first time in a long time, Alara believed him. They gathered their things, packed their meager supplies, and set out through the snow. The world around them was cold and unforgiving, but with each step, Alara found herself feeling less afraid. They were together, and that made all the difference. As they trudged through the snow, Alara felt a sudden sense of calm wash over her. The journey ahead would still be hard. There would be more challenges, but she wasn't facing it alone anymore. She had Adam. He was her companion, her protector, but more than that, he was someone she had come to rely on in ways she hadn't imagined. It was strange to think of herself like that, relying on someone else, but it felt natural with Adam. She didn't feel weak for needing him. Instead, she felt stronger, like together, they could face whatever came next. That night, as they set up camp in the shadow of the cliffs, Alara watched the fire flicker and dance, casting long shadows across the snow. She sat down beside Adam, her back against the cold stone, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself relax. She let the weight of her past drift away, just for a moment, allowing herself to enjoy the present. Adam was there, beside her, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. They didn't speak much that night, but there was an understanding between them, a comfort in the quiet. The stars above were brilliant and clear, and as Alara gazed at them, she realized how far she had come. She had been alone for so long, but now, with Adam by her side, she didn't feel like she was fighting alone anymore. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Alara felt ready to face it, not as a survivor, but as someone with a future. And that future, for the first time in years, didn't seem so impossible. The morning was crisp, and the air had a biting cold that seemed to pierce through even the thickest of layers. Adam and Alara stood at the edge of the mountain pass, the cliffs towering above them, and the snow stretched out as far as the eye could see. It had taken them days to reach this point, and though the journey had been exhausting, Alara felt a sense of accomplishment that she hadn't known in a long time. She looked over at Adam, who was carefully scanning the path ahead, his focus sharp, as it always was. He had become more than just her companion. He had become her anchor in this unforgiving world. They were a team now, and for the first time in her life, Alara truly understood the power of that connection. The silence between them was comfortable, a quiet understanding passing between them with each glance, each movement. It was as if they no longer needed words to communicate. Adam turned toward her, his eyes meeting hers. "We'll be through this pass by midday," he said, his voice calm and steady. Alara nodded, her heart swelling with a strange sense of peace. "I trust you," she said softly. The words were simple, but they held so much meaning. Adam's expression softened, and he gave her a small, reassuring smile. "We've got this." The path ahead was treacherous, the narrow trail winding its way through jagged rocks and ice, but Alara wasn't afraid. With Adam at her side, the danger didn't seem as daunting. They moved together, carefully navigating the treacherous terrain. The wind picked up, howling through the narrow pass, but they kept going, step by step. As they reached the crest of the mountain pass, Alara paused to take in the view. The landscape before them was both breathtaking and humbling. In every direction, the snow stretched on endlessly, the world vast and empty, yet somehow full of possibilities. For the first time in her life, Alara felt like she could see beyond the survival instincts that had driven her for so long. She wasn't just fighting to exist anymore. She was beginning to believe that there was more to life than just getting by. Adam stood beside her, his gaze far ahead, but his presence beside her was a constant, a reminder that she wasn't alone. They had come so far, and yet, there was still so much more to face. But for the first time in her life, Alara felt ready. She was no longer defined by her past, by the pain and loss that had shaped her. She was no longer the person who had to protect herself from the world. With Adam, she felt something different, hope. As they continued down the path, the weight of the past seemed to lift from her shoulders, replaced by the quiet strength of their bond. They didn't speak much that day, but it didn't matter. Every step they took together brought them closer to something new, something neither of them had ever expected. By nightfall, they found a place to rest. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow in the cold, and as Alara sat beside Adam, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. They had become more than just survivors. They were building a future, one step at a time.